Hello, my name is Carl McCargo, and I am a member of the reparations team presenting here at GA entitled Next Steps into Anti-Racism and Reparation. I am here primarily to introduce you to our speaking team of 3 speakers. But first, I would like to give you kind of an overview of what we will be presenting on, what topic area we will be presenting on today. Our team will explore our society's isms, racism, sexism, and classism, and others. These are mere symptoms of our culture's real pathology, the refusal to face its legacy of chattel enslavement. We will show individuals, congregations, and anti-racism teams healthy concepts and strategies that begins the healing from that past legacy of crimes against humanity. Our team hopes you will join us at GA and post-GA and beyond to begin the healing from that legacy of our tragic past. Now, I would like to introduce our team. Reverend Dr. Kristen L. Harper. Her guiding focus is, we need a new theology of darkness, a new way to relate to the darkness, the blackness, and brownness that surrounds us. The Reverend Dr. Kristen Harper is a minister of the Unitarian Church of Barnstable, Mass., where she has served for 20+ years, having previously served the Unitarian University Society of Daytona Beach area. She graduated from Meadville Lombard Theological School in 1999 and lives with her 2 cats, Tristan and Advent, in Marston Mills, Massachusetts. See her article in the UU World magazine, fall of 2021, entitled A Theology of Darkness. Reverend Harper also authored The Darkness Divine, a loving challenge to my faith. She can be reached at 508-362-2233 or minister@barnstableuu.org. We also have writer-activist Ms. Nina Cavan, co-founder of the internet news site Dear Evanston in 2016 for her city of residence, Evanston, Illinois. Ms. Cavan encourages neighbors to share their stories of working for justice. She has used book groups, festivals, and bus trips to Washington, D.C. and Montgomery, Alabama, to break down barriers in her hometown. Ms. Cavan's current work focuses on educating Evanston's white residents about the city's reparations program and helping to gather donations for that fund. She can be reached at ninacavan@gmail.com and also at 847-778-1809. And this brings me to me, Carl McCargo. I've been a UU for 38 years. I earned my Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology in 1981 from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, entitled The Differential Portrayal of Black and White Television Families. I have an enduring concern for the insidious and overt teachings of racism in our U.S. entertainment media. My favorite saying for stopping white supremacy is, stop learning it. I believe that the isms of our culture are mere symptoms of the unresolved crimes against humanity perpetrated upon African Americans during the 244 years plus of active chattel enslavement and the subsequent 160 years and counting of egregious oppressions, trauma, disenfranchisements, and violence. This legacy of inhumanity must be resolved, or our society will continue to descend deeper into the violence we see every day. When our society accomplishes reparations, every color, class, identity, and gender in America wins. My presentation will be first on the docket, followed by Reverend Harper. Then Ms. Cavan will be our third and final presenter. We are diverse speakers, yes, but we all focus on the next steps and action steps. We hope you will enjoy, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. Hello, my name is Carl McCargo, and I'm on the team that will be presenting this presentation on the AIW 2023 for GA, Next Steps into Anti-Racism and Reparations. When I first began in reparations, my first question I asked myself was, what are the justifications for reparations? But as my knowledge base grew, I began to ask a very different question. How do we effect repair from chattel enslavement crimes against humanity perpetrated on Americans of African descent? My conceptualization of reparations is that our nation convinced its entire population to accept and embrace chattel enslavement, white supremacy. After all, it was successful, and white supremacy and chattel enslavement became a legal institution in the very early years of our nation's fledgling history. How did they do that? In the 15th century, a series of papal bulls, popularly referred to today as the Doctrines of Discovery, laid the foundation for depriving non-Christian nations of their personhood, their nationhood, and from under the protection of God. They were seen as less than human, incapable of being civilized, and unfit to own land, and therefore it was legitimate to confiscate all their lands, all their resources, and put them into perpetual enslavement. This information came from the 500 years of injustice, the legacy of 15th century religious prejudice by Steve Newcomb. You can find that presentation at nativeweb.org. With such images of African Americans by the church, it is plausible to see how this nation could come to view my ancestors as slaves, not people. People who loved their families and were in turn loved by them. This then is the first step in our nation's descent into its adoption of a two-piece definition of humanity: skin color and human superiority, which translates into white supremacy. As our nation contemplates social justice, how can we overcome? Let's ask ourselves how we can overcome the effects of the past 600 plus years and counting of chattel enslavement, racial apartheid and disenfranchisement, racial terrorism and violence, and finally, possibly the most lethal of all, racist propaganda, which is white supremacy at its core. Our UUJEC Reparations Task Force has developed a 6-session presentation for social justice groups and interested individuals. This series was developed to give meaning to our action of immediate witness, AIW. Next steps into anti-racism and reparations. Granted to us at GA 2022. Our hope is to make this workshop meaningful to our chosen faith. The preview of our proposed workshop series is highly abbreviated for this venue. My intent today is merely to overview the content of your evaluation. We are hoping it will fill a niche in your social justice program. The intention of our 6-part workshop is to prepare each participant and team to present this informational perspective to members of their anti-racism teams, reparation teams, school boards, elected officials and their staff, and other interested parties. The first session is entitled Contemplation. And in that first session, we will go over team building, which is very important. And in team building, I think it is very important to develop a covenant. Now we have sample covenants, but your team may already have one, your congregation might already have one, but please give that importance to develop a covenant. And in the full series, there will be a sample covenant, but there are others as well. So basically, that's the very first step in developing a group, dealing with the issue as complex as reparation. So second subtopic in that first session is what motivated you to undertake work on reparations. And there are many questions, there are several questions that we have, yet I think that the full workshop will present that. A very important question in this second session of motivation is, can you be available for, say, one monthly meeting or however frequently you would like to meet? And how would you prefer, Zoom or in person? And how long you would like those sessions to be? Those are very important considerations when forming a team that needs to build its solidarity and cohesiveness. The third subsection is personal exercises. I think this is an important subtopic because it allows the team to evaluate its own goals, its own breadth and diversity of what you want to teach, not teach, but what you want to present to different groups that invite you into their, into their space. So that would be the first session, A, B, and C. Session 2 is entitled Perspectives on Reparation. And in our full presentation, this session broadens the perspective of reparations as holistic instead of merely as gender, ethnicity, or class, or gender identity, etc. It overlooks all the isms that I think can be distractions from real understanding of what are the real issues underlying the social phenomena that we see today in our nation. So this section also points out the holistic aspect of reparations that need to be considered. Because in our society now, the underlying issue, in my opinion, is um, white supremacy. And there is injury to all in a nation that has such a vicious underlying dynamic as white supremacy. So in this section, we will have videos. We have picked out 2 videos and 1 film, one photo. And we feel that this is going to be very important because it broadens the person's understanding of all of the different dynamics of reparations that can make your work a lot easier and more successful. So the first video that we have is called How Racism Has a Cost for Everyone. And this is a TEDx talk by Heather McGee. And it's 14 minutes and 21 seconds or 12 seconds. The second video is by Richard Wilkinson. And his presentation, his video stems from his book, The Spirit Level. It's a very important book to read. He says, we feel instinctively that societies with huge income gaps are somehow going wrong. And again, that this, you can see that this mentions societies, how societies are injured, not individuals, not gay and the lesbian community, the LGBTQ community, and not just one group of people. It's a whole society. So that's a clue right there that the current issue that's facing us in reparations and the need for reparations, it's injury to our society. So that is the 2 videos. What we have now, what I have now is a photo. And this photo asks a lot of important questions to each person, you know, that you can really kind of get your head around the complexity of it. Think about this. I'm going to share the video, one of the photos. Okay, at this time, you know, ask yourself, why? Was this good for the nation as a whole? Here's some clues from some of the generals, from General Tecumseh, William Tecumseh Sherman. And he says, and along with other generals, he says, bison hunters did more to defeat the Indian nations in a few years than soldiers did in 50 years. What did he mean by that? Why was it done? Why? Colonel Richard Dodge has another comment on this topic as well. He wrote, every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. So what was the intention of this picture? What is underlying the behavior that allowed this picture to occur? Can you guess those motivations? So at this point, we go into session 3. The third section of this film was the photo, and now we will go into the third session. The third section of this, which I think is possibly the most important. In my opinion, it goes to the heart of the issue. We will discuss white supremacy in our entertainment media. Our entertainment media is probably the most powerful institution that we have in our nation. It is my belief that the best way for our nation to eliminate white supremacy is to stop learning it. And the media, we will show, is just one way of learning white supremacy. So at this point, we have 3 slides that I would like to show you. The full slide presentation in the other programming, in the full program, has 12. But this is just 3 that I've selected for this venue. This is important introduction. Our need to know, media, the great teacher. It would be impossible to know everything about our media, especially our entertainment media. But we have to start somewhere. And here's a quote by Ruby Dee. She gives us a clue, points us in a different direction. If filmmakers could assume the responsibility of good citizen, could stress the best within the human capacity, and strive to make that commercial, the world might become a different and better place. I earnestly believe that had filmmakers taken it upon themselves to help create the proper climate for integration to take place, racism would have disappeared from this country. And the attribution is in the bottom right corner. It's from Films of Peace and Justice, the War Resistance League of New York, New York, and it's from 1987. Their Peace Calendar, volume 32. Our next slide. Again, we're talking about how do we learn white supremacy? How does our nation learn white supremacy? And this is a real example of cultural appropriations. You see here on the right, there's a person you might know, is the Lone Ranger. But the Lone Ranger wasn't real in a sense. He was chosen to, portray a hero, very altruistic, if you remember the series, and very brave. But his life story was based on the gentleman on the left, whose name was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was a deputy marshal in Oklahoma Cherokee Territory for 32 years, from 1875 to 1907. That's a pretty good record. I don't think any other deputy marshal served that long. The caption here says that Bass Reeves was known as the toughest cowboy to have ever lived. He captured over 3,000 criminals. He even arrested Belle Starr, who was his friend, for her notorious horse thieving. He is the man on whom Lone Ranger pattern his TV story on. Now, this information was gleaned from Black Gun, Silver Star by Art T. Burden. And the third and final slide for this venue is another instance of cultural appropriations. You see on the left a gentleman by the name of Bamurali Ambedkar. He was a real doctor. He was the doctor. He was a teenage doctor. You can see from the information below that in 1995, he entered the Guinness Book of Records as the world's youngest doctor at the age of 17 years. But what we saw, what we were taught in the 80s, was that Neil Patrick Harris, the young European American, was the real doctor. When you think about that, how do you feel that you do not know that truth? How would you feel that you enjoyed this program for so long, but it wasn't true? You were being carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. And that's, to me, is how we learn white supremacy. And this is what we have to unlearn. But as I said earlier, we have 600 plus years of white supremacy by the church, by financial institutions, by racial terrorism. That is a long time for such a message to be instilled in the fabric of our culture. So that's some idea of what media will teach us, what impact media can have on our knowledge. This fourth session is called Deepening Our Understanding of Reparations and Repair. The first, my thoughts on this is that white supremacy is primarily a lack of humanity that has been learned and practiced for over 600 years. It seems that all of our social isms show the same lack of human capacity, of human empathy. Protecting ourselves from the media propaganda will help, but it will take more. It's not enough. We see reparation justice as the ingredient that will help bring the humanity trait back into our society. I think of the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King here. He said, "You cannot legislate morality. You have to win hearts first." And that's what I am hoping that we can do and keep in mind when we're working on reparations, is that there is no enemy. Every citizen in America is on the same team. We are fighting for the soul of our nation because that's how long we have been betrayed and deceived. As we need to correct that aspect of our society. The second subtopic of session 2 is called Projects of Participants Finding Your Voice. Again, finding your voice can give you the confidence you need to face crowds, face groups, and present as completely and as thoroughly your presentation as possible. This is the part where we work with each individual to develop a project for themselves, whether it's a lay-led service or presentation to your senator or representative or to your school board. This task facilitates finding our voice, gaining confidence in what you think about reparations. This is an essential ingredient to being comfortable and effective in your presentations. That's session 4. Session 5. The title of session 5 is Broadening Our Understanding of Reparations Repair. In this session, we will discuss the global perspectives of reparations, what role the United Nations are playing, and what information have we gained from them already. What are the 5 areas of injury and repair suggested by the United Nations? Has an organization in your state paid reparations? So at this point, we are broadening the scope to almost an international scope, but keep in mind that we are working locally. And this brings us to session 6, current examples of repair. At this point, we will look at some of the programs that are being implemented statewide nationwide and statewide as well. California, the executive summary of reparations in California is a good example to start. They have a very comprehensive program, and it's easily understood, and that will be made available to each of the students. San Francisco has a very good reparations initiative. And our speaker, Nina Cavan, also is in Evanston, where there are reparation initiatives being conducted, and she's part of that, very deeply involved in it. And you'll learn a lot from her. Okay, so where has reparations been made in the U.S.? Will those efforts hurt or expedite nationwide reparations? Sometimes I think, and it needs to be some clarification there, that local reparations will not prevent citizens and residents of that state from experiencing the benefits of a national program if it is presented, if we ever get there. And I think we will. And number three, how would you see a change in this course? What would you like to change? So at this point, I want to conclude with a little overview. As I read more history of our country, it's becoming very clear that empire is also a contributor to the societal isms. The same barbarity, the same brutality that gave rise to chattel enslavement is apparent in empire. So just as racism, sexism, classism, gender identities, and xenophobia are masks the dangers of white supremacy, they also mask the dangers of empire. The underlying dynamics of empire are very similar to those societal elements of white supremacy. I would like to share with you a musing that I did on my journey to reparations. And it's about the power of white supremacy. White supremacy was the essential ingredient that gave rise to chattel enslavement. White supremacy nourished the ongoing development of chattel enslavement. White supremacy nourished its brutality. It nourished its depravity. It nourished the corruption. It nourished the inhumanity. And it's nourished the greed of the chattel enslavement institution. White supremacy was essential to the rise, dominance, and longevity of chattel enslavement and its establishment as a legal institution in America. Now in the 21st century, white supremacy continues to nourish that same consciousness of chattel enslavement. Without the success of white supremacy, chattel enslavement could not have existed. Its brutality, its greed, its inhumanity, and corruption could not have existed in a healthy society. White supremacy blinded America to the evils of its contradictions, such as equal protection under the law, liberty and justice for all. When it was happening, when white supremacy was at its heyday of being taught and needed for empire and for other types of institutional maladies, white supremacy was there. Without the success of chattel enslavement, without suppressive white supremacy, chattel enslavement could not have existed. Its brutality, greed, inhumanity, its corruption, and its depravity could not have been justified nor tolerated. It blinded America to the evils of chattel enslavement contradictions. And today, in the 21st century, racism, sexism, nor classism, vestiges of our chattel enslavement past could not and would not have emerged without that successful establishment and would not be part of our societal fabric today. So white supremacy is not a new issue. It was and is the root belief system that has allowed the Caucasian world, the Christian world, and the financial world to dehumanize and commit genocide on peoples of many nations since antiquity, especially those of color. Again, see the doctrines of discovery. We are deeply interested in this subject and see reparation as the all-encompassing issue of our time. The injustices and contradictions that were spawned during chattel enslavement are with us today and continue to injure all Americans, both materially and spiritually. We desperately need to heal from this tragic period of our history and its consciousness with which we still live. The soul of our nation is at stake. We must seek honest, clear-eyed solutions to why America has the highest index of murders, the highest imprisonment index among the industrialized nations and many other demographics that at least indicate problems, if not a national pathology. We have the highest income inequality and poverty rate, while being the richest nation that has ever been on the face of earth. These symptoms are not an expected byproduct of modernity and progress. Explanations to these issues must come from the hearts and souls in our nation who love justice, truth, and peace. We must question whether we are truly the shining city on the hill. We must answer a new question. How can we become the shining city on the hill, if that is possible by any society or even preferred? If that is possible by any society or even preferred, in more mundane frame, how do we make democracy democratic for all American citizens? Thank you, and I hope we will see you beyond GA 2023. And now we will hear from Reverend Dr. Kristen L. Harper. Thank you.
When most people think about reparations, they think about financial compensation for crimes committed against Black and Indigenous people during colonization and slavery, and the generations of poverty and economic hardship these crimes resulted in. Reparations are more than just that. They include making amends, taking responsibility, changing behaviors, and repairing relationships. To truly make reparations to Black and Indigenous people, we need to begin to dismantle the white supremacist culture in which we operate and live. One of the ways we unconsciously express our white supremacy is through our language and the imagery in which we portray cultures and peoples. The late Robert B. Moore, who was an educator and activist for understanding racial awareness, racial bias, and racism, wrote, "An integral part of any culture is its language. Language not only develops in conjunction with society's historical, economic, and political evolution, but also reflects the society's attitude and thinking. Language not only expresses ideas and concepts, but actually shapes thought. White culture determines the language of our society and therefore shapes society's thinking. White-dominated language continues to justify the superiority of white people and the oppression of Black and brown people. The language we use to describe people and communities of color, as well as the language we use to dismiss Black and brown people's concerns, impact how we view, think about, and act towards BIPOC communities and individuals. Let's start with the actual words Black and brown and dark. Sometime in the 1300s, the word Black became associated with sin and sorrow in English-speaking countries. By the middle of the 1400s, it was used to mean terrible, wicked, without moral or spiritual light. This was purposely applied to non-whites, primarily Africans, Arabs, and Muslims, to strip them of their humanity and justify their murder, enslavement, colonization, and the appropriation of the lands for which white Europeans benefit. Darkness has almost always been considered negative. In Old English, the word dork means without light, obscure, gloomy or sad, cheerless, sinister, wicked. Phrases like dark moon and the dark night of the soul only reinforce our negative feelings. Jackie James, former head of the Office of Diversity Resources at the Unitarian Universalist Association in the 1990s, wrote a wonderful piece called Dark and Light, Light and Dark. It goes like this: blackmail, blacklist, black mark, Black Monday, black mood, black-hearted, black plague, black mass, black market. Good guys wear white, bad guys wear black. We fear black cats and the dark continent, but it's okay to tell a white lie. Lily white hands are coveted. It's great to be pure as the driven snow. Angels and brides wear white. Devil food's cake is chocolate. Angel's food cake is white. We shape language and are shaped by it. In our culture, white is esteemed. It is heavenly, sunlight, clean, pure, immaculate, innocent, and beautiful. At the same time, black is evil, wicked, gloomy, depressing, angry, sullen. Ascribing negative and positive values to black and white enhances the institutionalization of our culture's racism. Let us acknowledge the negative connotations of whiteness. White things can be soft, vulnerable, pallid, and ashen. Light can be blinding, bleaching, enervating. Conversely, we must acknowledge that darkness has redemptive characteristics, that in the darkness there is power and beauty. The dark nurtured and protected us before our birth. The words black and dark don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. The words white and light don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. Imagine a world that had only light or dark. We need both, dark and light, light and dark. As a religious community, we can start transforming the way in which we set white people above black and brown people by changing our use of dark and light. We need to stop talking about the dark night of our souls or suggesting that the light is the antidote to evil, gloom, sadness, depression, ignorance of the dark. To begin the dismantling of our racist language, we need a new theology of darkness, a new way to relate to the darkness, blackness, and brownness that surrounds us, and to the people whose skin is often reflected in our disempowering language. I often use poetry to help people reimagine the dark and black. God resides in the depths of darkness, as in the light of sunbeams. The moon shines brighter surrounded by night, and life is secure in the black waters of the womb. As the night sky littered with stars demonstrates again and again, there is beauty in darkness and beauty in light, one no more brilliant than the other, one no more necessary than the other, one always complementing the other. Without the heated darkness of the universe splitting neutrons, electrons, and protons from atoms, life and light would never be. The task for us today is to recognize God in both, to see the divine in the rich brown earth, the textured black walnut, as well as the white snow and the pale pink jellyfish, to see the sacred in the panther and the swan, to embrace the dignity of the Black Madonna as it is embodied in the Virgin Mary. The task for us today is to look into the multifaceted colors of the onyx and to see the miraculous spectrum of color produced in the prism of a diamond. Most people accept that Jesus lived and offered ministry in an area spanning North Africa and the Middle East. And yet, most images we see of Jesus are long, straight-haired white man. If we portray Jesus as he most likely appeared, brown skin, dark hair, brown eyes, if the most influential teacher in the Christian world was a Black person, how might that change the way BIPOC individuals and communities are viewed and treated? The imagery in our culture of Black people continues to contribute to the poor treatment of and feelings about us. Black women, while sometimes portrayed as successful, are angry, disparaging of Black men, and loud. One successful movie franchise, Tyler Perry's Madea, is an example. Madea is loud, rude, aggressive, has little respect for the law, is reckless and ignorant. The strong protective characteristics of Black women are often mocked by white and Black men in a way that reinforces stereotypes that have been around since slavery. The angry Black person stereotype has been in existence since before I was a child. Over nearly a lifetime, every time I tried to speak out about what was happening to me, someone, a friend, a teacher, a mentor, a congregant would say, "You sound so angry." This is a way to dismiss Black voices and to label Black women as intrinsically angry. It focuses the attention not on the micro or macro aggression or the gaslighting that white people have weaponized, but on the Black woman who is bravely naming her truth. In Eloquent Rage, a Black feminist discovers her superpower. Writer, scholar, and activist Brittany Cooper writes, "Black anger, Black rage, Black distress over injustice is seen as one, unreasonable and outsized, and two, as a thing that must be neutralized and quickly. Black people are labeled bad and ungrateful for being angry. When non-Black people tell me my reality is not important, nor not relevant, not worthy of hearing, or not real, I have the right to be angry. When I am pulled over for driving with an expired admission sticker, when it's not expired, I have the right to be angry. When I am stepped in front of like I don't exist, when I'm waiting in line, I have a right to be angry. When I'm not listened to, when I'm asked to speak, I have a right to be angry. When what I say is ignored until a white person says it, I have a right to be angry. Justifiable expressed anger is freeing. It releases the toxic racism internalized by the gauntlet of micro and macro aggressions hurled at Black people as we move through life. As a Black woman, I have come to see anger as a survival tool, a way to not simply stuff all the ignorance, hatred, and fear of others into my own soul, a way to not be a silent co-conspirator to the destruction and erasure of people of color. Another way we erase Black people is by including the words assume goodwill in our covenants. Whenever we're talking about tricky subjects, particularly anything to do with isms, we bring up the fact that everyone should assume that everyone has goodwill in their hearts and are not intending to hurt others. Many years ago, I attended an anti-racism training with the late UU minister, the Reverend Dr. William Jones. I remember William Jones explaining the difference between intent and impact this way. Let's say I'm speeding out of a parking lot, run you over, and you die. That wasn't my intention, but you are still dead. In criminal law, it is called constructive intent, the unintentional results of an act. A few years ago, I was asked to lead a worship service with a colleague at a meeting of ministers and religious educators. I introduced a ritual where people are asked to pick up a pebble that symbolizes the joys and sorrows we carry around with us, and then put that pebble into a bowl of water, the water representing our community of hope and compassion. I invited a relatively new colleague to add several additional stones for such as people who were there, for the world we live in, for the earth which nourishes and nurtures us, and for all those joys and sorrows too scary or too private to lift up at that time. As I was naming the additional pebbles, the minister I invited to help me interrupted me and closed out the ritual. Now I thought, was she tired of adding pebbles after only 2? Did she think I didn't know how to end a ritual? I wonder if she would have done the same to a white colleague. When I named the inappropriateness of this behavior, other colleagues told me to assume goodwill. Assume goodwill is language used by white people that burdens BIPOCs rather than themselves to consider the impact of their words and actions. It implies that no matter what happens to the person of color is the one responsible for ending the conflict. There's no language for assume a person who says they are hurt is hurt. The phrase assume goodwill is often added to covenants we create in our congregations, our ministers' groups, and our larger efforts at organizing community. Over the nearly 50 years I have been a Unitarian Universalist, I have come to the conclusion that those with privilege use it to excuse their lack of attention to what they say and do to people with marginalized identities. When we lift up the hurt that has been caused, we become the problem. If we had only assumed goodwill, then we would not have felt harm, or we would recognize our feelings as unreasonable, the result of being too sensitive or projecting our feelings onto other people. The language of assume goodwill distorts the reality of the situation and lays blame on BIPOCs who are hurt by the words and actions of their white companions in faith. A couple of years ago, I wrote a prose poem asking, how can I assume goodwill when you fail to notice that I am not your servant, as you ask me to plunge your overflowing toilets, park your car, or carry your luggage? How do I assume goodwill when you never get my name right and call me by someone else's moniker over and over? How do I assume goodwill when you call my godsons little monkeys? When you say Black people are not intelligent enough to lead our faith? When you get up when I sit down next to you? How can I assume goodwill when you refuse to hear the pain, the hurt, the erasure of who I am that you are contributing to with your thoughtlessness, non-intentions? You have not consistently shown goodwill as you suggest I was affirmative action hire, a quota filler, a balm for white guilt. You have failed to demonstrate this goodwill as you judged me by my accent, by my different approach to faith, to community, to love, to justice. Is asking me if I wrote my own sermons goodwill? Is assuming I know what all my brothers and sisters of color are thinking and experiencing goodwill? Is interrupting my leadership or worship because you believe you know how to do it better goodwill? I cannot assume anything when you feel it is your right to touch my hair, my clothing, my arm without asking. I cannot assume anything when you allow no room for my humanness, my brokenness, my different expressions of joy, my diverse ways of seeing the world. I cannot assume anything when you welcome me into your space with suspicion and fear. I will assume nothing until you stop assuming about me. There are so many different ways we use language and symbolism to uphold white supremacy. If we are serious about being anti-racist, if we want to begin to repair our relationships, repair our society, we must be willing to look at what we say about and how we express and visualize BIPOC individuals and communities. It seems like such a simple thing, and yet white people continue to fight the changes we suggest. It's time for reparations.
Hi, everyone. I'm humbled to be included in this gathering and on this panel with Karma Cargo and Reverend Dr. Kristen Harper. Thank you, Jane Banner, for recognizing my local work and asking me to speak about my commitment as a white woman to working in the realm of racial justice and reparations in our community. Since 2016, I've committed myself in a variety of ways to helping build bridges between Evanston's very segregated white and black communities. I've worked to increase awareness about and amplify the voices and experiences of Evanston's black residents. I've been to bring Evanston residents together and raise funds for and encourage others to support black organizations, businesses, and initiatives. That led to my coverage from the very start of the process of Evanston's emerging work on reparations and encouraging support for, participation in, and contributions to Evanston's Reparations Fund. A bit of background about Evanston and our local initiative. After decades of de jure and de facto racist policies and practices in Evanston, the average income of black families here is $46,000 less than that of white families. Black people's life expectancy is 13 years shorter than for white people, and more than 60% of all people arrested in Evanston are black, even though they represent just 16% of the population of 75,000. And Evanston's black population is declining rapidly because of a lack of affordable housing. Robin Rue Simmons, then a rookie city council member representing Evanston's historically black Fifth Ward, where she was born and raised, and where she still lives, decided that the city's black residents shouldn't have to wait for federal reparations for enslavement. So she introduced the reparations resolution that passed in November 2019 and has been the driving force here and behind the many municipal and state reparations initiatives that are bursting into reality throughout the country. In Evanston, the first municipal reparations initiative is the Restorative Housing Program, which acknowledges the harm caused to African American and Black Evanston residents due to discriminatory housing policies and practices and inaction on the part of the city from 1919 to 1969, which is when discrimination in housing was banned. The resolution committed the first $10 million from the sale of recreational cannabis in Evanston to fund local reparations for housing and economic development programs for Black Evanston residents. Separately, our Evanston Community Foundation now holds a fund that accepts contributions from private entities, businesses, organizations, houses of worship, and individuals. The fund is administered by the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston, a group of Black leaders and community members whose charge it is to work with the Black community to determine how funds raised are dispersed. In December 2020, I was honored to speak as a white supporter of reparations alongside Robin in a Zoom symposium for Amherst, Massachusetts residents. Activists there, taking Evanston's lead, had proposed a resolution toward a path of remedy, and 2 weeks later the town approved their resolution. What Robin said that night, and says often, really resonates with me. I believe she says that something just as radical as the harm itself is needed as a remedy. I'm grateful to have met Robin 8 years ago at the very start of my journey and to call her a friend. I highly recommend watching the new documentary, The Big Payback, which is available on PBS. The film follows Robin's fight as the racial reckoning of 2020 and the pandemic play out in the background as she leads our community in an uphill battle to obtain the big payback. The crew also follows Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who continues the fight in Washington, D.C. to pass H.R. 40. The film documents the two women as they navigate supporters and detractors, black and white, in their quest toward correcting historical wrongs. I'm grateful to have been included in the documentary. As I said earlier, it's every white person's responsibility to repair the racial harm, past and present, that each of us has committed, intentionally or unintentionally, through apathy or ignorance, and simply because we benefit from systemic racism by living comparatively comfortable lives thanks to the privilege of our whiteness. But too many white Evanston residents live here with little, if any, knowledge about the racist history of Evanston, how it shaped the city and our lives, how racism, overt, subtle, and especially systemic, continue today, and at what cost to black residents and to us all. And I know because I was one of them. This is my friend Kitty Johnson, who passed away recently, talking about her father's experiences having to flee to Evanston from Georgia, and then his experiences in Evanston with racism. And this is my friend Lonnie Wilson, who is a fourth generation Evanston resident and very perceptive. He's a grassroots activist and a recovering crack addict. While many of us engage with black people in a variety of superficial ways, sadly, we live in silos. We often don't know the deep personal and family histories and experiences of our black acquaintances and colleagues, because seldom do we socialize authentically and intimately across race, and especially across socioeconomics, in our homes, at our restaurants, at other social spaces, or in our houses of worship. The truth is that in our white supremacist world, we don't feel the need to. But once you know someone, really hear and see them, and open yourself to learning about your neighbor's experiences and the truth about the place you call home, your world changes and you're compelled to act. At least that's how it happened to me. I didn't set out to become an advocate or an activist or a public speaker. Mine has simply been a personal journey, one step leading to the next, that I felt compelled to share and encourage others to come along, because white Evanstonians, white Americans, have an unquestionable responsibility to help make reparations happen in all sorts of ways, and that takes awareness and action. My recent journey toward this work began in 2015 with a bus and a book. The bus, a ride through Evanston's historical Black Fifth Ward, and the book, Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. As you'll see, buses and books become quite a theme. But the seeds were planted a lot earlier for me. I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa during apartheid. I'm Jewish, and my Polish Jewish grandparents, who fled from Poland to Cuba to South Africa, were almost the only survivors in their family of the Holocaust. And remember, Germany continues to pay reparations for harm caused during the Holocaust. We lived in a quiet, well-heeled suburb with green front yards, lazy blue swimming pools, and live-in black maids. There were 22 million black people in South Africa and just 6 million of us. Africans were ubiquitously and intimately a part of my young life and utterly apart from it. Though we saw them, they were also invisible. On their knees, they polished our floors, they made our breakfast and served us tea each afternoon. At the sound of the dinner bell, they'd serve our supper, then they'd clear the table and disappear. They were bound by strict laws. They required a pass signed by their employer if they were out on the streets. They were frequently picked up for various infractions by roving police vans we called Black Mariahs, which I'd see rolling by as I splashed in our pool. It's all I knew, and there was nothing I could do. Our maids knew our families and friends, our language and customs, and though we thought we loved them, we knew so little about them, we didn't think to ask. Our maid Francina had a room that was separate from our house, separated from our house by law, by a small concrete backyard. It was mysterious to us, and we'd shyly peek in. As much time as she spent in our house, her room for us was a world away. At Christmas, Francina would go home to a place called Fokeng. What did her house look like? We never asked, we never visited, and it was not something to ever consider. The township of Soweto lies just 20 miles from Johannesburg, but like Francina's room and Fokeng, to me, it may as well have been a different country. All I knew was black people were forced to live there. I read in our government-controlled newspapers that it was dangerous. Grumpy green buses crammed with workers from Soweto would unload in Johannesburg every day. My parents had a painting I loved of a Soweto street scene by the African artist Ngutani hanging in our living room. All I knew of Soweto, I knew from the confines of my world, my house. And then around 1975, when I was 11, my class was taken on a field trip to Soweto to visit a school there and donate blankets we had crocheted. We went by bus. I remember being stunned at how quickly we arrived at the township border, how close it was. I smushed my nose to the bus window to see the Ngutani painting come to life outside. The school kids greeted us with smiles and hugs, and we laughed and played. It was the first time I had seen black South Africans where they lived, and it was just one day. Soon we were boarding the bus back and riding the million miles back home. The Soweto uprising happened just a year later and helped speed up the end of apartheid. And 2 years after that, in 1978, when I was 14 years old, my family moved to Chicago. So it's 2015, 40 years later, and I'm 8,600 miles from Johannesburg. I'm on another bus, this time with Leadership Evanston, a program of the Evanston Community Foundation. We're learning about the history of Evanston and driving through the streets of Evanston's Fifth Ward. I've lived here for 20 years. My husband and I, like so many liberal white folks, chose Evanston because it was diverse. And as self-satisfied as we are with our choice, we've only ever had white neighbors, lived on white blocks, never really taken the time to consider why, in its diversity, the city is so segregated, how African Americans got here, or what redlining was, or what it has wrought. So most of what I know or have ever paid attention to about the Fifth Ward is news reports of crime and gun violence. I've never shopped here and never visited anybody's home. Church and Dodge, the center of the Fifth Ward, is a 5-minute car ride from our 6th Ward, but it's a world away. I stare out the window, remembering that other bus ride so long ago. I'm gutted. I realize I've never lived in Evanston. I don't know it at all. Its duality, its disparity, and I know so many people just like me. Suddenly I know for sure that this time, at this way late stage of my life, I'm not going to just stare out the window anymore. As we learn about our city, our Leadership Evanston cohort is reading Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. In it, Stevenson, an American lawyer, social justice activist, and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, a human rights organization in Montgomery, Alabama, lays out 4 steps we all need to take toward the goal of racial justice. Get proximate. You can't solve problems or make assessments from a distance. You need to understand the nuances and the details. Get uncomfortable. We are all broken, and in brokenness, we understand something about compassion. To truly fight for justice, we must be prepared for an uncomfortable journey. Change the narrative. We must begin to talk about all the ills of the past and their connection to today. Truth and reconciliation as a nation are needed before we can begin to change the American narrative on race. Embrace hope. Despite the myriad headlines of growing inequality and racial tensions, Stevenson cautions us against reacting with despair and to instead protect our hope quotient. Stevenson's steps were written for me. I want to get uncomfortable. I want to get to really know people in my community, share experiences and stories, and try to build bridges between our 2 often separate realities. I couldn't name it then, but I know now that what I wanted was to make personal reparations for all of the years that I couldn't and then didn't take action, not only to atone, but to heal my own brokenness as well as the world's. So many folks like me don't know what we don't know, never learned what we weren't taught. Racism is the water we swim in. This is the late Sonny Robinson, a highly successful entrepreneur who I interviewed several months before he passed away. And he told me about the fact that he had owned the first bus company that would bus kids from the Fifth Ward to white schools during the period of desegregation. Part of our leadership program was a group project to focus on a specific Evanston issue. My group focused on youth violence and started a Facebook page called Dear Evanston, interviewing mostly Black Evanston residents and leaders about their experiences and opinions about this ongoing crisis. I love people and I think I'm a good listener, and with a background in public relations and writing, I've always been compelled to share what I know and learn. So though our year-long program ended, I had just begun. I was learning so much, waking up to myself and history and the present. Through my interviews, it became glaringly apparent to me, better late than never, that gun violence in the Black community is a symptom of our country's and Evanston's racist past and present that has stripped the Black community of so much for so long. The resilience of the community through the centuries and decades of harm and trauma is unbelievable. I kept listening and learning and writing and sharing. And then I felt the need to go beyond storytelling, though I firmly believe that storytelling is a form of activism in itself. More and more, a theme in my interviews emerged far beyond gun violence. Black people living in the Fifth Ward had created a self-sufficient and cohesive community in the face of discrimination and lost so much of it with desegregation. I began advocating fiercely against gun violence, organizing rallies covering others' protests and actions, raising funds for the families of gun violence victims, and arranging a bus trip to Springfield to meet with state legislators. Around the same time, I and a group of community members organized a summer outdoor event in August 2016 at a park in the Fifth Ward, designed to bring people together for fun and to provide resources for young people. With a local librarian who is Black and a racial justice activist, we started the Dear Evanston Racial Justice Book Group, which drew 80 to 200 people every other month to read and discuss books such as White Fragility, The New Jim Crow, The End of Policing, The Color of Law, Just Mercy, and more. We held all our gatherings in buildings that historically housed programming by and for Evanston's Black community and worked hard to make them racially inclusive. Many of the white people who attended initially had never entered the buildings we met in. As much as the books were central to the project, it was the coming together of Evanstonians from different walks of life that provided so much of the real magic. After Donald Trump's inauguration, a group of us organized 4 buses from Evanston to the Women's March on Washington. While the main goal was to protest Trump in DC, the immediate objective was, as always, to bring racially and culturally diverse community members together into proximity to listen, learn, and connect, and for each bus to feature local speakers who would address the racial justice work they were doing in Evanston. In 2018, Tim Rose, the director of Evanston's amazing Fleetwood Jourdain Theatre, which produces African American and African diaspora plays, co-wrote a play with Piven Theatre's Stephen Fido called A Home on the Lake. And I was incredibly honored that they used my interviews as background and inspiration for a story about redlining and zoning that kept the Black community away from building houses along Evanston's lakefront. So back to 2017, when we were despairing about Trump, I was doom scrolling Facebook and happened upon a post about a new museum in the making, the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Incarceration, to Mass Incarceration, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. It was founded by none other than my hero, Brian Stevenson, and was under construction. The museum, I read, would show the continuum of American racism through history, and the memorial would honor the thousands of Black Americans who had been lynched in this country. Then and there, I knew it. We had to have a community bus trip to Montgomery. And in September 2019, with an incredible team of organizers, we made it happen. 100 Evanston residents from 18 to 82, Black, white, Latinx, Asian, and of various socioeconomic and religious backgrounds, took 2 buses on a 16-hour journey each way to face the past together. Named for Stevenson's "we must be prepared to get uncomfortable" step, and aptly for the discomfort of a long bus ride, we called it the Uncomfortable Journey. Our powerful journey made it to the front page of the Chicago Tribune, and we received and continue to receive many phone calls and inquiries from people who want to do their own journeys to Montgomery.
Column 105, Evanston residents, ages 18 to 80, load buses to Alabama for the uncomfortable journey.
So that gets me back again to the genesis of my involvement in racial justice and reparations. In Germany, no monuments to Nazis stand, but plaques and markers throughout the country memorialize events of the Holocaust. And just 2 years after the end of World War II in Poland, Auschwitz was made a national monument. In South Africa, apartheid ended with a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and only 7 years after apartheid's end, a museum documenting the entire era was founded in Johannesburg. But in the US, we are just beginning to wrestle with our past, in fact, with our present. I'm grateful to have stumbled my way into playing a small role bringing awareness and action to Evanston. I do believe that events and activities, small and large, that are intentionally designed to bring our communities together can help forge connections and help us move toward reconciliation. What I've learned is that it's crucial for white folks to learn and understand the history of the Black community in our towns, cities, and country. To recognize that we will never repay the debt or repair the harm, but we must acknowledge it and begin the process of healing. The past cannot be erased and mustn't be ignored. To get involved, reparations is about a financial debt, but it's about so much more. It's about addressing injustice socially, politically, economically, all intertwined. Racism is about injustice, and it must be addressed also locally, nationally, internationally, by everyone. To just start, begin to form relationships that weren't there before. Get out of your silo, but stay in your lane. The people who suffered should set the agenda and decide on the remedies. White supporters, allies, co-conspirators must support, advocate, and bring our assets to bear. Our job is to keep asking, how can I help? I'll leave you with words from your very own Reverend Eileen Wiviet and congregation member Sarah Vanderwicken, both of whom I recently interviewed about UCE's commitment to racial justice. And you can see what Eileen said about it. To answer, slavery was a long time ago. I wasn't here. I just arrived in America. I just arrived in Evanston. Those aren't answers. What is my family's history? We have our own part to play in the vast system. We must do our own internal work and exploration. So you can see what she talks about. And then Sarah spoke about how she grew up in a lily white suburb, was lucky enough that my mother, who grew up in Memphis at the turn of the century, moved north and became involved with the YWCA. She sent me to a YWCA camp, which is how I met the first Black people I ever knew, except for household servants, and became friends. I was privileged to have a window into their lives and perceptions. So for what Black Americans have been forced to pay, we must apologize and repay. It's a moral and financial debt I believe is owed in dollars and deeds for the privileges we take for granted, many of which we gained because others were denied. Whether we were born here or not, whether our ancestors owned slaves or not, and regardless of how much we've suffered in our own lives. The road is long, but everyone and every milestone matters. And I am hopeful.